People who grew up in the 1970s often carry a way of thinking that feels unfamiliar to anyone born after the year 2000. Not because they're hard to understand, but because the world that shaped them no longer exists. In fact, much of that childhood wouldn't even be allowed today. The freedom they were given would raise eyebrows, trigger concern, or be labeled as neglect by modern standards. And yet, quietly, that same environment built one of the most psychologically resilient generations we've seen. They grew up in a world with almost no supervision. As children, they could disappear for hours at a time. No phones, no tracking apps, no constant messages asking where they were or when they'd be back. A kid born in 1970 might leave the house in the morning on a bicycle, meet friends from the neighborhood, wander through empty streets, fields, or construction sites, and no one would check in. There was only one rule that mattered: be home before the sky turned dark. No panic, no police calls, no adults assuming the worst. Just an unspoken belief that they'd figure it out and return on their own. That kind of freedom wasn't just thrilling, it shaped the mind. Over time, it created an internal reflex. Instead of waiting for guidance, reassurance, or permission, they learned to rely on a quiet inner response. I'll deal with it. Not because someone taught them confidence, but because there was no one stepping in to solve things for them. Self-trust wasn't praised, it wasn't discussed, it was necessary. But to truly understand the psychology of people born in the 1970s, you have to look one generation earlier. Their parents came from a far tougher reality. Many had lived through war, post-war poverty, rationing, or extreme instability. These parents didn't talk much. They didn't explain feelings. They didn't sit down to analyze emotions. They also didn't dramatize hardship. They worked. They endured. They survived. They didn't complain. They didn't collapse under pressure. They rarely showed fear. Love existed, but it was quiet. It came in the form of food on the table, long workdays, and the expectation that you would grow up strong. Affection wasn't spoken. It was implied through responsibility. And that silence shaped their children more deeply than anyone realized. So kids of the 1970s grew up early. If something broke, you tried to fix it. If you made a mistake, you carried the consequences. If life became difficult, you adjusted. A child born in 1970 learned early that problems were normal. That struggle wasn't unfair. And that responsibility wasn't punishment. It was simply part of life. There was no emotional safety net waiting beneath you. No one rushed in the moment things felt uncomfortable. Help didn't arrive on time. You became it. That's why people from this generation often feel conflicted today. They stand between two worlds. They remember a time when toughness was expected. They watched their parents work long hours without announcing it. They saw neighbors help each other without cameras, likes, or posts. They were taught, directly and indirectly, that when life gets harsh, you handle it. But at the same time, they were forced to adapt to a modern world built on speed, noise, constant connection, and endless comparison. They don't fully belong to the past, and they don't completely fit into the present. They are the bridge between two realities. Now compare that to those born after the year 2000. They grew up surrounded by information, by screens, by opinions, by constant visibility and comparison. Their challenge isn't survival, it's an overload. Not a lack of intelligence, but too much stimulation. Not weakness, but pressure coming from every direction at once. This isn't about blaming one generation over another. Today's youth are sharp, creative, and emotionally aware. But they're fighting a very different battle. Where earlier generations faced physical danger and uncertainty, this one faces mental noise, expectation, and non-stop psychological input. Different struggles. Different scars. So here's the real question. Which generation carried the heavier weight? The ones who grew up free, but unprotected? Or the ones protected from danger, yet overwhelmed by the world? And more importantly, which one are you? This video isn't about nostalgia, and it isn't about judgment. It's about understanding the patterns that quietly shape who we become. Across generations, experiences, and time. If this felt uncomfortably familiar, you're exactly where you're meant to be.